Welcome to the Genius Talk podcast. I'm your host Atul Raj from the bestemailmarketer.com, and today we have Mike Jesowshek with us. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited.
Awesome, brother. So, for our listeners who don't know you, can you tell them who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, so name is Mike Jesowshek. And really what I do is tax strategy for small business owners. And so I've been an entrepreneur since the age of 14. Started out in the online marketing industry and kind of used my CPA and accounting background as a backup plan. In around 2013, started a virtual digital cloud-based accounting firm, but wasn't doing any tax at that time and was referring tax out, but really could not find good resources to help people understand how to save on taxes. There's a lot of good people, a lot of good tax preparers that would prepare and file taxes, but really kind of hit roadblocks when I would try to find people that could help people save on taxes. And so I started to do the research my own, started to do tax planning on myself, and really kind of fell in love with this whole idea of tax planning. And so about 8 years ago, started a podcast helping people understand what strategies are available to them. In 2021, sold the majority stake in my accounting firm so I could focus 100% on the podcast, and then started a software about 2 years ago. All go with my mission of helping small business owners understand what tax strategies are available to them and then how to actually implement those tax strategies.
So, I'm guessing you're not giving any kind of services, but you are giving consultancy. Am I right?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that take up my time. Two main things. One is the podcast, and obviously that is free type of content that's out there that we provide. And we do a blog post, YouTube videos, all that stuff. And the goal is to help with that free content. We also have a software. And so that software is called TaxElm. And that TaxElm is for those that want that next step, that they want to kind of have somebody hold their hand through this tax implementation process. So those are the two things that take up my time: a bunch of free content, getting a bunch of stuff away, and then also a software that those that say, hey, I want my hand held during this process. I need help with the implementation piece. We have kind of a solution that helps them with that part as well.
Great. So, can you share a recent example where one of your strategies helped a small business owner save a significant amount on their taxes?
Yeah. So when we look at tax strategy, I kind of break it into two pieces. We have what I call our core tax strategies. Those are strategies that, regardless of your business size, we can implement them. So if you're making $10,000 a year, we can implement them. If you're making $10 million a year, we can implement core tax strategies. And then we have what I call advanced tax strategies, typically reserved for those earning roughly $300,000-$400,000 or more. We start to look into advanced tax strategies. But whenever I'm talking to a business owner, we say, before we ever even look to advanced, we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can on the core tax strategy piece. And there's kind of two initial concept or a mindset when it comes to core tax strategies that I like to talk about. And it's this concept of moving after-tax spending into pre-tax spending. And so after-tax spending is what most people are used to. If you're working for somebody else, you're a W-2 employee, you have your gross wages, you have all these taxes taken out, and then you get your take-home pay. And all the spending that you do with that take-home pay is on money that's already been taxed. But as a business owner, we have sales or revenue, and we have all these expenses that go into it, and then it leads to our profit, and we pay taxes on our profit. So any spending that we do inside of our business prior to that profit amount is considered pre-tax spending. And so a concept that we like to talk about is, how do we move things from after-tax spending into pre-tax spending? Let's go through a few examples. Let's say it is the home office deduction. I believe that every business owner, likely 95% of business owners, should qualify for some sort of home office deduction. Now, your home is something that you're going to pay for no matter what. Whether you're a business owner or not, you're going to have costs to live in your home. But now as a business owner, you get a deduction for part of those costs. Or maybe it's hiring your kids in your business. As a father, we're always supporting our kids and we're sending them to basketball camps or baseball camps or amusement parks with friends, whatever it is. And typically we're going to use after-tax dollars for that. But what if we could find a legitimate thing that our children can do inside of our business, a job that they can do inside of our business? We can pay them a reasonable rate for the work that they're doing, and we can get a business deduction, pay our kids, they pay no income taxes on that. And that is, again, moving money from typically after-tax spending into pre-tax spending. And so, when most people talk about maximizing deductions, they say, well, my accountant, yeah, we do that. My accountant comes and talks to me at the end of the year and they say, yeah, go buy a new truck that you don't really need, but you'll get a tax deduction for it. And we say, no. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, how do we take spending that you're already doing, but instead of doing it as after-tax spending, how do we move it to pre-tax spending?
That's a really creative way. Okay, so what are the most common tax mistake you see business owners make every year?
Yeah, the biggest one that I see in my role is just people confusing the word tax. So when most people hear taxes, they think, oh, I meet my accountant once a year, we prepare and file taxes, and then we move on. And that's tax preparation and filing. That's important. That's required by law. But tax prep and filing is just taking information and sending it up to the government agencies. What we focus on is not the tax prep and filing. Of course, we need to do that. But what we put our attention on is tax planning. What can we do between January and December to make sure that we're paying the least amount of taxes legally possible? So I think that so many business owners get caught up into this idea that taxes means tax preparation and filing, where what we want to change that focus on is say, yes, that's important, but let's also think about tax planning. What can you do in your business, regardless of your size? Again, like I said, whether you're making $10,000 a year or $10 million a year, there is strategy available to you. So regardless of your size, what strategies can we understand and put into practice between January and December to make sure we're paying the least amount of taxes as legally possible? And then, of course, we're going to do tax prep and filing after the year's over, where we take that information, report to the government what happened in our business, in our life for that year from a tax perspective.
Okay, so how do you stay up to date with tax law changes?
Well, that's a good question, because tax law is always changing, right? And so I think that's important to understand when tax law changes. Like we had a major change overhaul here in 2025 with the One Big Beautiful Bill. There's a big change that came through, and so it's understanding what of those changes are relevant to me, or in my case, what of those changes are relevant to my audience, right? So there's a lot of changes that came through that don't matter to the everyday small business owner, to the everyday individual, and so that's how I can take 100, 200,000 page new tax bill. And that's how I can take it and kind of weed out the things. Okay, this isn't going to affect 95% of my clients. I don't need to focus on that. And so, as a tax strategist, it's a constant, we're constantly learning. I say every day, I'm learning something new about tax, whether it's tax strategy, whether it's tax law, I'm learning something new. And then my goal is to just say, how do I unpack that? And really my focus is, how do I take a complex subject and make it easy to understand for the everyday business owner, for the everyday individual? And so that's where a lot of my time is spent, is unpacking a complex legal jargon that doesn't make any sense into something that actually does make sense and is actually actionable from the individual receiving it.
Okay, so what advice do you have for someone who is looking to find a trustworthy tax profession?
Yeah. So, when we're looking for a tax person, I think it's important to understand, like I said before, that there are tax preparers and then there's tax strategists. I'm not saying all, but most tax preparers don't do tax strategy, or they do very little tax strategy. They're going to say, hey, go fund a retirement account. And that's their tax strategy piece to it. So you might have a really good tax preparer, someone that's been preparing your taxes for years, prepares their family's taxes, is a great person. And that's great. Let's keep them. That's a tax preparer. They prepare and file taxes and they do a really good job at it. But that's not the stopping point when it comes to taxes. We also need that strategy piece, that planning piece. How do we commingle this idea of tax preparation and tax planning into one cohesive plan? And so oftentimes you're going to have a tax strategist, someone that helps you save on taxes, and then you're going to have your tax preparer, your tax filer, that person that actually prepares that tax return and sends it to the government. So I think that when you're understanding that, you need to understand that, so that when you're looking, am I looking for a tax preparer? Am I looking for a tax strategist? Or maybe both. And they're not always going to be the same person.
So how do we know that the person I'm hiring is a tax strategist?
That's a good question. I think that you would first want to understand, do they have content out there? Do they have information available out there that talks about tax strategy? Or maybe you are into a tax strategy. Maybe you say, yeah, I've heard Mike talk about this idea of hiring our kids. And so I want to hire my kids in my business. Ask that person, hey, I want to hire my kids. Can you walk me through what that process looks like? And if they say yes, okay, maybe they start to know tax strategy. If they're like, no, we don't do that here. Well, you kind of know immediately that's a tax preparer, not a tax strategist. And so, some of those questions is, if you've heard of some tax strategy that you're interested in, that you're saying, yeah, this sounds like something I definitely want to take advantage of, start to ask your tax preparer, or the tax person you're working with, ask them about them and see how they react to that. And if they're saying, yeah, we'll help you out with that, maybe they do some tax strategy. If they're saying, no, we don't do that, or I wouldn't do that, whatever it might be, well, maybe they're more of a preparer than a strategist. So those are some questions I think you can start to look at, but then also look at the content out there. Are they go on their email list? What type of strategies are they recommending to you? Are they just telling you about tax deadlines and they're telling you just to, the tax strategy is funding a retirement account? That's probably the
That's very
extent of their
yeah.
planning, so understand kind of what content do they have out there, and do you relate to the type of planning that they want to do?
Hmm. Okay, from all the strategies, okay, which one is your favorite?
That's a good question. I think my favorite is this idea of maximizing deductions, this concept of after tax versus pre-tax spending. For one reason is that there's so many strategies wrapped into that mindset, that there's so many strategies wrapped into that concept. But we've already talked about that. So if I pull that away, we
Yeah.
look at some of the other kind of big hitting strategies. One of the main ones that we always look at early on with business owners is this potential of an S corporation. So if you're set up as a sole proprietorship or a single member LLC, you're just kind of getting started in your business. If you're set up a sole prop or single member LLC, you are going to pay your normal income tax rate on 100% of the profit of that business. And you're also going to pay self-employment taxes on the 100% of that profit. So you pay your normal income tax rate, whatever bracket you're in, plus you're going to pay self-employment taxes, which is 15% on 100% of that profit. Now, if we take that same entity, let's say it's an LLC, and we elect for that LLC to be taxed as an S corporation, still going to remain an LLC, EIN, everything stays the same, but we're just electing for your LLC to be taxed as an S corporation. You're now required to pay yourself, as an owner of the business, you're required to pay yourself a reasonable salary based on the work you're doing. And that reasonable salary is going to get hit with self-employment taxes. It's not necessarily called self-employment taxes, but it's called FICA taxes, which is the same amount as self-employment taxes. So that reasonable salary gets hit with self-employment taxes, but any profit over and above that reasonable salary, you avoid self-employment taxes on. So let's say that you're making $80,000 a year. If you're making $80,000 a year in a single member LLC, you're going to pay your normal income tax rate on that $80,000, plus you're going to pay self-employment taxes of 15% on that $80,000. Let's say we take that same LLC and we elect for it to be taxed as an S corporation. And let's just say that we say a reasonable salary for you is $40,000. Now we're going to pay self-employment taxes on $40,000, but we're avoiding self-employment taxes on the remaining $40,000. That can be a super powerful strategy when it makes sense. Now, typically, there's a few added costs when we go to that S corp route. Added costs are, one, we have to run payroll to ourselves. And so there's costs associated to do that payroll correctly. And the second piece is now with an S corporation, the tax return's a little bit more complex. So the preparation cost, the filing cost for that is going to be a little bit higher. And so we have to outweigh those costs with the tax savings. And that's why we typically say we don't look at an S corp until we're expecting roughly $50,000 or more in profit. At that point, the costs are far outweighed by the tax benefits from switching to an S corporation. So that is another strategy I love to talk about business owners with. It's not meant for everybody, but it's a good fit for a lot of people. And so, it's analyzing what opportunities are available to you, what tax saving opportunities are available to you, and does it make sense in your situation, your location, where you live, and those types of things.
Okay, so for our listeners who want to get help from you, where can they go?
Two things. I recommend going to taxsavingspodcast.com. There you'll find our blog posts, information about our podcast, the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast. You can also buy my book on Amazon, the Small Business Tax Savings Handbook. So taxsavingspodcast.com. Another resource is our software. That's TaxElm. That's TaxElm.com. For those looking to take that next jump and say, hey, this is the year that I want to pay the least amount of taxes legally possible, TaxElm is going to be a great resource for them as well.
Okay, so if someone is doing business international, okay, or if someone is doing nationally, so can they both have same kind of accountant, or there are different kind of accountant for international and national?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that sometimes it depends on what type of international activity you have. Do you just have clients that are from international? Or are you getting products that are shipped to you internationally? That's one thing. If you have offices internationally, that's another thing. If you're a U.S. citizen that's living internationally, that's a whole nother thing. So I think that the first piece is a lot of accountants focus and specialize in this area. Now, the tax strategy for a US citizen is generally going to be the same, because what the IRS looks at and what the US government looks at is that you have to pay taxes in the US on your worldwide income. So whether you're generating income in the States or whether you're generating income in another country, you have to pay taxes on, generally stating, worldwide income. So a lot of the tax strategy stays the same. What changes is the tax preparation and filing. There's different tweaks, there's different things that you need to do when preparing and filing your tax return. If you're located internationally, you have an office internationally, you're working with people internationally, there may be some more restrictions on the preparation and filing side of things. But generally, a lot of the strategies we talk about are going to be relevant, for them as well.
This is my personal question, okay? So, looking back when you started your podcast, what's one lesson you would tell yourself if you could restart again?
Yeah, the thing is just get content out there. When I first started, I was not a person that was into podcasting. I was not a person that really did much video recording, things like that. And so as soon as I jumped on camera, I was like, I would freeze. Like I had a perfect topic that I'd want to talk about, but I would start talking and then I would, say the wrong word. I'd stop it, restart it, re-go again. And so, one thing that I learned along the way is just go, like press the start button, record the episode. If there's things you need to cut out, we can cut it out after the fact, but just go with it. Because what used to be for me, a 10-minute episode would take me an hour and a half to record because I'd stop it, redo it, stop it, redo it. Now I press start, I record, I'm done, fix any minor edits at the back end, but just get content out there. Having some content is so much better than trying to make perfection with no content. Some content with some minor issues with it is okay. It's so much better than zero content that you just need perfection. So that from a podcasting standpoint, that has been the biggest breakthrough for me.
Okay, Mike, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and it was really awesome chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.